This podcast is a proud member of the Fan Hub 100. Football without fans is nothing, so we've partnered with Fan Hub to put fans first. Search Fan Hub app to play your part in the journey.
Welcome back to another Speak Sunderland Reaction podcast. After wiping the floor with Lincoln City on Saturday with a 4-0 win, Sunderland were back in action last night with a home game against AFC Wimbledon. With multiple factors to look at, the game did finish 1-1 with both sides having to settle for a point. Joining me today is Paul once again and Phil Smith from the Sunderland Echo. How are you both getting on? You well?
Yeah, I'm all right. Bit tired. Another week covering Sunderland, but doing okay. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Paul, yourself?
Yeah, not too bad as well. I think everybody's tired, isn't they? I'm tired as well. So, yeah.
The life of a Sunderland fan being tired the day after a game.
Yeah, definitely.
But yesterday's result on paper looks like an incredibly poor one. You know, you were home to a Wimbledon side that were just beaten 5-2 by Charlton, but Sunderland were without more than 10 first-team players yesterday. I think it was 12, maybe 13 in total. Obviously, some injuries and 8 first-team players part of a COVID outbreak at the academy. Now, I heard the rumour a couple of hours before kick-off. It was kind of going around group chats and stuff. And initially, I didn't believe it as, you know, I automatically assumed if we had that many players missing with COVID, the game would just be postponed. But Sunderland released a statement around an hour before the game, an hour before the teams were announced, and there's been a lot of confusion surrounding it. You know, amongst the players missing yesterday were Aidan McGeady, Charlie Wyke, Max Power, Tom Flanagan, Remy Matthews, Chris Maguire, Josh Scow and Luke O'Neill, and obviously the latter two were missing with injuries. Denver Hume missing with an injury, Jordan Willis, Lyndon Gooch and Aidan O'Brien. Them three were involved in the squad, but you know, they were nowhere near match fitness. That I don't think they'd had a day of training. But Phil, what's your understanding on what happened yesterday? Obviously, in light of the recent EFL statement as well.
Yeah, it's a good question. How long you got? No, I think obviously the Sunderland were first aware of an issue around Monday lunchtime, that a player was having symptoms and would have to be tested. We kind of had a slight hint that something was going on, although we didn't realise the scale of it because Lee Johnson on Monday afternoon, when he spoke to us in his injury update, said he would be naming the team quite late. I think it's now fairly obvious why that would be the case. Yeah. So when obviously the positive test was returned, you then obviously have to go through a process where you identify, as we all would if it happened to us, who you've been in close proximity with, and those people then have to self-isolate. So that was the next step for Sunderland, was to establish who would have to isolate as a result of that positive test. That then extended because 2 other players reported symptoms, so then they had to be withdrawn from the squad. So Lee Johnson essentially had to change his team 3 or 4 times through the course of Tuesday. So while Johnson was changing his team and establishing who was available, obviously Sunderland were in conversations with the AFL about what happens next, and I guess this is where the confusion and the difficulty lies. They essentially made clear that they would like to postpone the game. The AFL said they could postpone the game if they wanted, but as is the case with all other games that have been called off this season, they would then be subject to an investigation, and potentially that could end up with a tribunal. The problem at the moment is that there's no precedent, because no other club who've had a game called off or have postponed a game has got that far yet. So Sunderland's view, whatever people's opinions on it, Sunderland's view ultimately was, because they had no idea what the potential sanctions would be and what the investigation would entail, that they felt they should play the game. And that was why we had a kind of a patched up squad that went out and played against Wimbledon.
Yeah. Well, obviously with the squad playing on Saturday and then training, I'd imagine almost every day, surely the club can't have been, 100% sure that the side fielded yesterday were COVID-free.
Well, it's a really good question, and that's kind of one of the many aspects of this. Obviously, everyone's aware that when football came back in the summer, at that stage in the Premier League and the Championship, players were being tested twice a week, and the AFL kind of dropped that mandatory number of tests when the League One and League Two returns. That happens less frequently. So yeah, there's an obvious concern here about the safety of everyone involved, and we'll get a sense of how big the outbreak is over the next couple of days, because obviously those players who are self-isolated as a result of the first positive test will now be tested. If there are any further positive tests, then that could mean that the reach zone, if you like, in terms of the players who have to self-isolate, could grow. And we all know there's kind of an incubation period for this virus. So yeah, we'll see over the next few days whether the outbreak is going to be any worse. But yeah, of course there are clear concerns about the safety of everyone who was involved last night, and there's a lot of questions for the EFL, and I suppose once we have a bit more clarity for the club to answer as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, Paul, obviously there were so many players missing yesterday, and a completely disjointed squad was announced at 6 p.m. How did you feel going into the game in such weird circumstances?
Well, I don't think the game should have went ahead full stop, to be honest with you. I don't know what either the club's scared of the investigation, for what reason what does that investigation entail? Is it potential points deductions if it's found that there's not enough, like they've got enough squad to actually play the game? There's something gone on really for it not to have been cancelled, because obviously it is a health and safety issue that should have, for me personally, it means the game should have been postponed. So I've got no idea why that went ahead. I'd like to know why. I know this is just rumours, and I don't speak to anybody at the club, but somebody mentioned on Twitter that with Sky Bet broadcasting it, maybe there was some money involved for either the EFL or the club that meant it sort of pushed the game to be going ahead. That could be complete rubbish for all I know, but that's something worth thinking about. But yeah, for me, I personally wouldn't have started it with the amount of players that were out.
Yeah, the thing that I don't really understand about it is, obviously earlier in the season, I think it was Blackpool, it might have been. I think we had 3 first-team players missing with international duty, and the game was postponed, and it was fine. EFL had no issue with it. But now that we've got 8 players missing with a potentially lethal virus, you've got another 5 players missing with injury. It's all of a sudden a big issue to get it postponed, and that's the thing that doesn't sit normal with me, I suppose. But we will take a look at the side that did start the game for Sunderland. Obviously, Lee Burge was in goal. Conor McLaughlin started as a right back. Bailey Wright kept his place alongside Dion Sanderson, who made his first league start of the season. Callum McFadzean at left back. George Dobson was brought back into the midfield to partner alongside Ledbetter and Elliot Embleton. Jack Diamond out on the wing, Aidan O'Brien on the other side, and Will Grigg up top. And Paul, obviously it was a almost forced starting 11 for Sunderland, but on paper, before kick-off, did you think that side should and probably, would have been capable of picking up all 3 points?
Yeah, definitely. When I seen the starting 11, because obviously you hear that there's going to be 8 first-team players out, and I'm thinking, wow, who's going to be starting this? But when I seen the lineup, I thought actually that's not too bad. That team is more than capable of getting a result against Wimbledon, and I mean, we got a result, I suppose. We did get a point, but it was disappointing from what I could gather. I mean, I just thought that we would have played a bit better than we did. I don't know whether the players missing has had some kind of effect on the players that did play, like just sort of knocked the confidence or whatever, but it wasn't the best performance, in my opinion.
Yeah. And Phil, obviously, Dion Sanderson was an almost enforced change yesterday, but we've seen very little of him, despite what I thought was an impressive display on his debut, I think a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago. But have you been surprised with how little we've seen of him, given Willis has been out for so long as well?
Yeah, I have to be fair. I mean, it's an interesting one, because obviously when they got Sanderson in, it was a bit of a surprise to everyone, because he'd been lined up to go to a championship club on loan, which then basically fell through at the start of deadline day, and that was when Sunderland then moved to bring him in. And it was a funny one, because obviously at the time, the player who'd been injured for Sunderland was Arbin and Zamajli, and so the feeling was that they'd go out and get a kind of a left-sided defender rather than the right one. But because Dion became available, kind of the way it was explained to me was, this kid's so good that we just have to go out and get him. It's an obvious opportunity to upgrade our team. And of course, obviously, in the background then there was known that there might be some issues with Jordan Willis's knee. So I kind of expected him to come in, and he did come in with a slight injury, which didn't help. That stopped him playing for a couple of weeks. But I had expected him to kind of move his way into the side pretty quickly. So it has been a surprise to me that he hasn't featured as much as he has. I mean, to be fair as well, you have to say that to be fair to Conor McLaughlin, I think he's been pretty
Yeah.
consistent over the last month and deserves some credit for that. But it certainly was a surprise to me that he hasn't played more, and I thought he did okay. Last night. It was, all areas of the pitch. It's difficult when you have unfamiliar partnerships and players brought in at kind of the last minute. You expect things to look a little lackluster at times, but I thought he did okay. He certainly looked like a player with a bit of pedigree, which we know he has.
Yeah. Well, the game got underway, and albeit it was a few minutes later, as neither Wimbledon or the officials wanted to leave the warmth of their dressing rooms or wherever they were placed with the COVID rules and whatnot. But from the first minute, Wimbledon's game plan was clear to see for everyone. They were going to be compact at the back, try and nick something on the counter attack. I think it was 3 at the back in possession, 5 out of it. But Phil, obviously, it appeared to be a 5-4-1 for Wimbledon, which in any division for any side, it's always difficult to break down. But Sunderland are notorious for failing to break down teams that sit back against them, especially at home. And fans are often quick to criticise opponents for turning up at the Stadium of Light and adopting that style of play. But for many teams, it works, and you can see why they do it. But why do you think Sunderland struggle to break teams like this down so much?
Well, I think one issue is that I think the lack of kind of pace in the squad and the forward areas is a bit of an issue. Like if you watch the first sort of 15-20 minutes of the game last night, it was obvious that Sunderland were trying to get the ball in behind the Wimbledon defence really quickly. What you want to try and avoid is a situation where Wimbledon, like you mentioned, can get everyone behind the ball, and it then becomes very difficult to break them down, and you're vulnerable to the counter. So Sunderland were trying to be quite, I suppose, direct is the word, and getting behind quickly, but they don't really have the players to play that way. And Lee Johnson's already spoken about that's something he wants to look at next month in the January window. So I do think that the way he always explains it is that Sunderland have some very good technical players, but they need space in which to be to be at their best. And the way that Sunderland's team is currently set up, and the kind of lack of options, I guess the lack of variety in terms of their pace up front, means that they can be too easy to defend against if you just kind of sit in. So yeah, I think that's definitely, it's a recurring theme, isn't it? We've seen that, a lot at the Stadium like this season and in previous seasons as well. So they clearly find it much difficult to play against teams who sit in at home.
Yeah. Well, Sunderland had what I believe was 71 or 72% possession in the first half, but failed to create a single clear-cut chance. I think Will Grigg had one half chance, I would say, after McLaughlin's put a ball in, but he was second the ball. George Dobson was doing what you'd expect George Dobson to do. Grant Ledbetter was slow on and off the ball, and Ebbleton was quite wasteful. But 42 minutes into the half, Wimbledon entered the Sunderland half for the second or maybe third time in the game, and he's racing the box, and Vic Fadzines, he's pulled him back, he's tripped him up, and for me it was a Stonewall penalty. But Paul, I've seen a few fans saying it was soft, but for me, I think that's just Sunderland bias kicking in. But was that a penalty for you?
Yeah, I'd have to say it was. Like I've said before, when you're watching your own club, you see it through a different lens. And if we'd been them, if it'd been us, we'd have been calling for a penalty then. So yeah, you can't really complain with it being a penalty. As for the actual first half itself, I would just like to say, I think the way we were playing, trying to get the ball in from the wings when you've got Will Grigg playing up front is not the way we should have been. I know it's hard to break down any team when they've got that many players behind the ball, but we should personally, I think we should have been trying to play through them rather than round them. If we'd had Wyke there, fair enough, try and get the ball crosses into the box, but it was just totally wasteful in my opinion. So yeah, that's what I just thought of the first half in particular.
Yeah. Well, the penalty was given, and I don't think any of the Sunderland players, disagreed with the decision. They all saw it the same way as the referee. It was a clear pull, clear trip, and a clear penalty. But Joe Piggott stepped up to take it, and he sent Lee Burge the wrong way to make it 1-0. And obviously there was a lot of interest in Joe this summer, and I believe Sunderland were loosely linked with a move, but he did of course remain at Wimbledon. But outside of the penalty, there wasn't really much that happened. Obviously Sunderland, like I said, dominated a lot of possession. Ledbetter had a lot of the ball, but didn't really move forward with it. The same with George Dobson. I think there was one time when Dobson was in the final third, and he's turned around, sprinted 30 yards back, and played it back to Lee Burge, which, as fans at home to teams like AFC Wimbledon, it is infuriating, but it is what it is. But half-time arrived, and George Dobson was replaced by Lyndon Gooch, and I was glad to see Dobson go off. But I thought he was really poor, and I think he has been pretty much every game he's played since he signed. But Phil, even with 13 or so first team players missing, Dan Neil still didn't get a run out yesterday, and I don't think he has in the league yet. Do you think there's more to it than we see as fans? Because Parkinson was reluctant to give him a chance at all, and Johnson, albeit 4 games into his tenure, he also seems a little reluctant to give him his chance.
I just don't think Johnson's seen enough of him, to be quite honest. I don't think there's any great kind of mystery or controversy there. I mean, Parkinson was asked about Dan Neil a lot, and Parkinson did kind of say that he felt Neil's levels in training had dropped after his pre-season performances, which kind of explained why he didn't play him more. But I think with Johnson, you have to remember that Lee Johnson still only led Sunderland through about 3 or 4 training sessions.
Yeah.
So I just don't think he's seen enough of Dan Neil yet to kind of make a full judgment on him. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that going forward. If we're sitting here in 2 months' time and he's still not played any minutes, then I might have a slightly different view on it. But I just think this is one of the problems, and we've seen this a lot over the years, and players like George Honeyman have talked about it, whereby one of the consequences of changing managers is you have to start again. You have to prove yourself all over again. And, I think Lee Johnson is someone over time who will give young players a chance, and we've already seen that with Jack Diamond. But I think it's one of those where at the moment, one of the consequences of a new manager coming in is they just don't get a huge amount of time to spend with these players on the training pitch. So I don't think there's any great concern to that at the moment. But if the situation's still the same in a couple of months, then maybe I'll see it differently.
Yeah. And the thing that's, I say worried, it's not the right word, but I'm going to go with it anyway because I can't think of the right word. But Dan Neil wasn't even involved in the under-23 squad yesterday either. And I know a lot of the games this season, he's travelled with the first team, but obviously not made the bench. He's kind of there as the backup player if someone was to pick up an injury in the warm-up or something. But he's not even playing football for the under-23s much this season. Do you think that's going to hold him back slightly if he does eventually get the chance, or if he is eventually forced into the squad?
Yeah, I think he does need to be playing. I think, I've always viewed this season Dan Neil in a slightly different kind of category, if you like, to players like Jack Diamond and Elliot Embleton, who have already been out on loan and are also a few years older. These are players who are getting to the point where you want to see them breaking through. Dan Neil does have time on his side in that sense, but yeah, he does need to be playing football. And, the plan initially was that if he hadn't kind of broken through in the first team in January, they would maybe consider a loan, and I think that's still pretty much the best way to go, because we've seen in the past that when you don't get these lads out on loan to play senior football, their development can stagnate. So yeah, I think that I'd like Lee Johnson to be able to have a bit more time to see him on the training ground to see whether he will use him. But if that's not going to happen, then certainly a loan from next January would be something that I'd be exploring.
Yeah. Well, 62 minutes in, Jack Diamond, who has another excellent game in the circumstances, of course, he's got the ball, he's looped the ball into the back post for Bailey Wright, who's, he's took a touch on his chest, he's absolutely hammered it past Truman, and, for how good the finish was, it was another excellent delivery from Jack Diamond, who we will get on to man of the match later on, but, for me, I think he was our better player yesterday, and I give him man of the match in the last 2 games as well. But, Paul, how many points do you think we've almost dropped under Parkinson because of his reluctance to play the players like Jack Diamond? And how much of a difference do you think he would have made earlier in the season if he was playing?
I think it would have made a hell of a difference. I think if Parkinson had picked some of these younger players to come through, like the Diamond, Embleton and Dan Neil specifically, I think we would have gotten more points. And I don't think potentially he could have still had his job. I don't know, but yeah, he was definitely stubborn in his ways. He didn't want to change it up, and we've said plenty of times in the past that he didn't seem to have a plan B when things were going wrong. So for me, yeah, it would have made a massive difference, not if he'd played these players.
Yeah. And Paul, there were claims for a foul by Wright, although to me it seemed to have very little, if anything, in it. Yeah. Looking back at it, do you think Wimbledon had a shout for a free kick in the build-up to the goal?
Yeah, well, like we mentioned earlier on, you do see things differently through your own lens, but I don't think there was anything in the free kick, to be honest with you. Nah, not one bit.
Phil, for you, do you think Wimbledon had a shout for that or not?
No, I think it was just pure defending, a good cross, good strength from Bailey Wright, and an excellent finish. I thought it was a Stonewall penalty, and I didn't think there was any foul there. I think the referee got both of those right.
Yeah. Well, obviously no foul was given. Sunderland did get the equaliser, but unlike sometimes you've seen that we've got a goal and the momentum's went up, we've gained momentum, we've went forward. It didn't really happen yesterday, and again, I think that comes down to the fact that Wimbledon were happy to kind of sit back, absorb the pressure. But one of the reasons for that was Grant Ledbetter for me. And there's no denying that he's had a great season so far, but I said it a few weeks ago and it showed again yesterday. For a game that we are chasing, or like I say, against a side like Wimbledon who will sit back, for me, I think he slows the tempo of the game down far too much and really limits the team going forward. And I know a few people said the same on Twitter, but Phil, for you, do you think Grant Ledbetter is the right person to have in midfield for games like that?
Yeah, I mean, my opinion's slightly different. I think if the ball gets slowed down in midfield, that's because the options aren't there in front of him. We've seen plenty this season. We've seen plenty in the past that if players are making those runs, Grant Ledbetter can find them. But I think this goes back a little bit to what I was saying before, about that lack of variety in the forward areas, and I don't think the movement's kind of good enough to open up the defence. I do agree that I think Sunderland need to be a lot quicker in their play around the opposition box. That's something that will come with time on the training ground and getting that familiarity. But I can understand the point in terms of it can be very frustrating when the ball goes from midfield and it goes sideways or backwards. And certainly that's something that kind of needs to improve. But I do think a big part of it is, the movement, especially at home in front of Ledbetter, needs to be better. And if when that happens, we'll see his kind of full passing range.
Yeah. Well, Sunderland continue to dominate possession, but every so often we did get caught out on the counter-attack. And in a way, Wimbledon will be somewhat confused as to how they didn't actually win the game. I know Longman hit the bar in the second half. Joe Pigott missed a couple of decent chances in the box. And obviously the game did finish 1-1, but given how the game went and how many chances Wimbledon actually had, Paul, do you think Wimbledon will have actually came away last night wondering how they didn't take all 3 points?
Yeah, I could say that definitely. It's like a lot of Sunderland fans were saying, how are we not already losing this game? So yeah, it's about to work the other way, to be honest with you. And if they had won, if they'd gotten the 3 points, we couldn't really argue too much about it, to be honest with you. So yeah, I can definitely agree with that.
Yeah, and Phil, Hull and Lincoln both lost again yesterday, and of course we beat Lincoln on Saturday, and I think Hull lost on Saturday as well. But if Sunderland had won yesterday, they'd now only be 4 points from top, and obviously would be in a much better position, potentially back in the playoff positions. Although I think Doncaster do have a slightly better goal difference than us. Although I'm not sure on that one, but obviously it is a strange one given the situation we found ourselves in. But do you think yesterday was another missed opportunity to close the gap at the top?
Well, I suppose in a straightforward sense, it was. It's a very difficult one, really, because it was so frustrating that off the back of the Lincoln game, and the kind of feel-good factor and the buzz that everybody had, it was so frustrating that, that Sunderland weren't able to build on that. And I guess it's also fair to say as well that it's frustrating when some of the issues Sunderland had in this game were ones that we've seen before. Having said that, when you look at, the fact that, on the bench was a combination of players who played either 90 minutes to the under-23s the day before, or players who were still nowhere near fit. And I think that ultimately, it's hard to argue with a point. It certainly could have been an awful lot worse. So, yeah, it's really frustrating, and it definitely was another missed opportunity. But I guess you have to put it into a different category to some of the other poor recent performances, just because of the circumstances around it.
Yeah. Well, the game, like I said, did finish 1-1, and Sunderland do find themselves 6 points from top now. Obviously, Hull are still top of the table, Lincoln still in second. But we will move on to the player ratings from yesterday's game, and of course, we will start with Lee Burge, like we always do. And throughout the game, he did make some important stops. The one goal he's conceded was a penalty. You can never really mark down the goalkeeper for conceding a penalty. But outside of that, I thought he was quite assured. His distribution was okay. Like I say, he's made some important stops to keep us in the game. But purely for the fact he did concede slightly, Burge 6 out of 10 for me, Paul.
Yeah, I think the standard 6 out of 10 is very fair rating for him. Like I say, he didn't have loads to do. The penalty couldn't really do much about it. It's just the look of the draw, really. But yeah, I would just be happy with a 6, I think.
And Phil, for you, Lee Burge?
I think I gave him a 7 because I thought the second save just before half time was a really, really good one, with his legs off Longman. So I gave him a 7, but I certainly think a 6 would have been fair as well.
Yeah. Well, Conor McLaughlin started at the right back, and he defended fairly well. He put a good ball into the box with Grigg in the first half, and outside of that, didn't really do much wrong. So again, I've given him a 6 out of 10, Paul.
Yeah, 6. I could give him a 6 as well. To be honest with you, they didn't do much wrong. I've quite liked him. He hasn't got like that many. Sorry, there's a lot of fans on Twitter that they do sort of slate him a bit, but I've always been quite happy with them. So if he keeps this up, I'd be quite happy for him to start every game. So for me, a 6. Yeah.
Phil, for you?
Yeah, 6. I thought he had a really good first half. I thought he tired a little bit in the second, which is understandable given the football he's had. But yeah, I thought it was another decent showing from a fairly consistent player.
Yeah. And Phil, were you somewhat surprised to see the team line up the way they did in terms of defence? Obviously, Sanderson started as the centre back, and McLaughlin started as the full back. And for me, I don't know if it is just me, but I would like to see them the other way around. I think Sanderson has a bit more pace about him, a bit more of an attacking threat when he's playing as the full back, and I think McLaughlin's a better general defender. Were you surprised to kind of see them two line up in the way that they did?
Not really, because I think you would have wanted to disrupt things as little as possible. So by keeping McLaughlin on the right, you don't have to then disrupt the partnership that he'd built up with Diamond on Saturday. And don't forget, it was McLaughlin's cross for the second goal. And actually, in this game early on, he put in a terrific cross to the front post that Grigg didn't get to. So I think going forward, I think there's a debate about whether Sanderson can bring you more in attack, but I can understand why, given the circumstances, he wanted to take the option that disrupted things the least, and that was probably just in keeping McLaughlin at right back.
Yeah. Well, Dion Sanderson did start at centre back, and I think it might have been his second or third appearance since joining the club on loan from Wolves, but I thought he looked assured. He won a lot in the air. He gave us some pace at the back, and there was a couple of times where we were caught out on the counter, and he was able to recover. And I don't think he really did anything wrong again. So Sanderson, for me, I've given him a 7 out of 10. Paul?
Yeah, I was going to say exactly the same thing. Very solid performance. He is a fantastic person to have as cover, if not starting in the first team in the future as well. So, yeah, after that performance, he's got to have a 7 from me.
And Phil, for you?
Yeah, no arguments there. I thought it was a pretty accomplished showing.
Bailey Wright started alongside him, and he has come in for some criticism over the last few weeks, especially since Lee Johnson's came in. But early in the game, he was shaky defensively again. I think Pickett had the better of him in the air, but he grew into the game as it was played, and there was an outstanding finish to draw the game level. And before the goal, I would have had him down as a 5 out of 10, but he's got the goal that earned us a point and saved the game. So Bailey Wright gets a 6 out of 10 for me, Paul.
Yeah, I've always been a big fan of his, but as you see in recent weeks since Lee came in, he has been a little bit shaky. I don't know whether that's just because he's trying to impress the new head coach or what, but he was still a little bit shaky, but he got the goal. I've given him a 7, so I'll stick with that, I think.
And Phil, for you?
Yeah, I think the goal was so good that I think he has to get a 7, because I'm not sure Sunderland would go on to score unless someone produced that bit of magic. So for it to come from a centre back on his weaker foot,
I can say I'm sure he's right-footed as well. But I think Johnson said in his post-match interview as well, he's better with them volleys on his left than he is his right, isn't he?
Well, there you go. So yeah, I think that goal was so good, and I think that was earned Sunderland a point they weren't going to get otherwise. So I went for a 7.
Yeah. Callum McFadzean made up the back four, and his attacking contributions were extremely limited. And of course, he gave away the incredibly silly penalty in the first half, and gave away a foul throw in the second half, which, when you look at professional football, I don't understand how they can't take a throw in, but again, it is what it is. And he was caught out a number of times defensively. I thought he was probably our worst player yesterday, so I've given him a 3 out of 10, possibly a little bit harsh. But Paul, for you?
Yeah, I've given him a 5 out of 10, to be honest with you. I don't think I don't understand the throwing thing. I don't understand why does that exist anyway. I just really don't understand what the difference is there. But not the best performance. We've seen him play better, but I wouldn't give him anything lower than a 5, I think.
Yeah. I'm not actually sure what the foul throwing was given for. Obviously, if you're over the line, then it's a foul throw. If you don't throw it all the way over your head. I don't really understand it, but a professional fullback should be able to take it for win, I'd imagine. But Phil, for you, Callum McFadzean?
Yeah, I think I gave him a 4 in my ratings just because I thought that was that penalty that was poor defending. I didn't think he had his best game. I think he's been a canny addition, to be honest. I have to say, I think he's had some good games, but I thought he struggled last night.
Yeah. Grant Ledbetter started in his usual holding midfield role. And as I said earlier, for me, he slowed the game down too much in a game that already lacked the tempo. And again, like you said, Phil, there wasn't really much movement around him, and I think that does come down to the fact that we were missing. Gooch wasn't fully fit, McGeady was missing, Maguire was missing, Power scoring. All the players that we would associate with that movement were missing yesterday. So I've given Ledbetter a 5 out of 10. Paul, for you?
Yeah, I'll give him a 5 as well. Didn't he give the ball away again as well at some point?
Quite a few times, yeah.
Yeah, and it's happening a bit too regularly for me at the moment. I know he does have some really excellent performances, but it wasn't one of his best. It reminded us a little bit of when he was in, sort of playing under Parkinson, a lot more sideways and backwards passes. And I know, as Phil's mentioned, it's because he doesn't have many options ahead of him either. But that's obviously a tactical thing. It's not Grant Ledbetter's fault, I suppose. But yeah, it was still irritating to watch. Very frustrating when there's 35 seconds to go and the passing backwards. So yeah, he gets a 5 from me.
Yep. And Phil, for you?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I gave him a 6. Like I say, I think the issues are a bit further forward, but certainly it wasn't his most influential game.
Yeah. George Dobson was brought back into the side, and I believe that was his first start under Lee Johnson. He may have started in the cup, I'm not entirely sure, but pretty much the same as Ledbetter. I thought he slowed the game down a little bit, and more so than Ledbetter ever has. George Dobson's always been notorious for backwards and sideways and miss-hit passes as well, and I don't think yesterday was any different. So I've never really been a fan of George Dobson, and until he starts putting better performances in, I don't think I ever will be. But based on yesterday's game, I've given him a 4 out of 10. Paul?
Yeah, I'll give him a 5. I totally agree with what you're saying. I watched him come on the 68th minute against Lincoln City, and I thought he played excellently. I actually give him, for that half, I give him a 7.5. So I was quite sort of happy to see him start, to be honest with you, if he'd carried on with that performance. But it goes back to the same thing of not having the options ahead of him. So for me, yeah, I'm going to give him a 5.
Phil, for you, George Dobson?
Yeah, a 5. He's a player who gets a lot of stick. I think I like him as a player, and he's a great lad. Bags of heart, bags of running. But I think it's obvious at the moment that there's a confidence issue with him, especially in possession, and we saw a bit of that last night. So yeah, I think a 5's a fair call.
Yeah. Elliot Embleton was brought into the side, and he's been in and out of the starting 11 over the last few weeks, but he did start yesterday, and a few occasions he did link well with some of the attackers. He played an 8-1-2 with Grigg in the first half, but dragged the effort wide. But his crossing was quite poor. A lot of the link-up play did come to no prevail, but I've given him a 5 out of 10. Paul?
Yeah, I was going to give another 5 as well. I think just because there's that many men behind the ball and the inexperience of not being able to try to break these teams down properly, it was sort of hindering him, sort of had the shackles on a little bit. So even though it's not fully his fault again, I have been impressed with him in recent performances. He gets a 5 today.
And Phil, for you?
Yeah, I think that's probably fine. I gave him a 6 just because he was involved in the build-up to that equaliser. Played a nice pass out of Diamond, and I do like Embleton because he'll at least take chances, and sometimes that means he'll put one out of play or he'll miss something. But I do think Sunderland need more players like that who want to take their risks. So yeah, I gave him a 6, but it's certainly, he's certainly got a lot more in the tank as he gets back to full fitness. I think that's for sure.
Yeah. And Aidan O'Brien was the first of 3 attackers, and early on there's a lot of neat touches he made, and he was involved a lot, but didn't really make anything happen. And in the games that I've seen him play, I'm not entirely sure what he's supposed to bring to the team, because he's not a natural goal scorer, but he's not the creative player either. But it's a strange one for me. But O'Brien, based on yesterday's game, I've given him a 5 out of 10 again. Paul?
Yeah, I'll go with a 5 as well, to be honest with you. Like I say, I think a lot of this it's not purely the players' faults. I think that tactically we got it wrong. and we not being able to beat the teams down they're just not very good at doing that. So yeah, I'll give him a 5.
Phil, for you, Aidan O'Brien.
Yeah, five as well. The only thing I would add is that O'Brien had only actually had one training session after being injured for about a fortnight, and I don't think he would have been in the squad at all had it not been for the COVID outbreak. So yeah, I think it's definitely a 5. He didn't influence the game much, but I think it's probably just bearing in mind the fact that really shouldn't have been on the pitch in the first place.
Yeah. And Phil, what do you think Aidan O'Brien's best position is in the Sunderland team? Because like I say, when he's played at Millwall, he's played out wide. It's a strange one because I don't know where he's supposed to fit in and get the best out of him. Where do you think he should be starting in the Sunderland side?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because obviously he was brought in to play kind of through the middle as that like second striker, if you like, and it was a strange one because I actually thought his first few performances were pretty good. He got in some good areas, showed some nice touches, stretched the play well. It was just that he missed some big chances, and as so often happens, his confidence seemed to drop a bit, and then his performances generally declined. So I don't know. I still think his best performances since he came here have been in that kind of second striker role, but we have seen his level dip from the first 3 or 4 games he played in. So yeah, it is a tricky one. If Sunderland are going to play 4-3-3, clearly he's going to have to play off the left because I don't think he's going to kind of lead the line as the sole striker.
Yeah. Well, Jack Diamond once again started on the other wing, and he looked really bright. But with Wimbledon sitting so deep and compact, he had little room to work in. It was a great ball into the box, like I say, inch perfect pass for the equaliser. And I thought he was our main attacking asset from yesterday's game. So I've given him a possibly generous, but a 7 out of 10 for me, Paul.
Yeah, I was going to say a 7 as well. I think without him on the pitch, I don't think we would have even gotten a point. So yeah, I'm happy to give him a 7.
And Phil?
Yeah, no issue with that. Obviously not as influential as he had been on Saturday for obvious kind of reasons because of how the game panned out. But yet again, he showed that kind of bravery on the ball, which we've all enjoyed watching. So yeah, another good showing from him.
And then Will Grigg, obviously made up the starting 11 and played as the central striker. And throughout the game, he struggled to have any impact on it. He had so many defenders around him. There was one ball put into the box that we've mentioned from Conor McLaughlin early on in the game that he didn't quite get to. But I don't think he really did anything wrong. He didn't do anything right. So I've given him a 5 out of 10, Paul.
Yeah, I'm torn between a 3 or a 4, to be honest with you. As a striker, his job's to get in positions to score goals. He kind of do it regardless of the way the game's panning out, whether we've got to attack them or whether we've got space and movement. Whatever the opportunity arises, he doesn't seem to take it for me. So for me, I personally wouldn't play him in a shirt again. I know our hands were tied, but we had to play him when we used him. But for me, he doesn't do much at all. So I'll give him a 4, I think.
Phil, for you?
Yeah, I gave him a 5. I had heard in the build-up to the game that he was another one who had a little knock and maybe wouldn't have played otherwise. So I think that's worth bearing in mind as well. But yeah, 5 for me.
What's your view on Will Grigg? Because obviously, like George Dobbs and like a couple of other players, he is one of the most heavily criticised in the club, and fairly justified based off the fact we've paid what I believe was an initial £1.5 million fee. But it's a lot of money for League One striker. He's came into the club and he just hasn't scored the goals that we've expected him to. And I've always been the person that will try and defend him no matter what. And I get a lot of stick for that as well. But, for a lot of the time he was played as a target man under Jack Ross and under Parkinson, that, for any striker, when you're not scoring goals, it does shatter your confidence. And when you're low on confidence, things just don't go your way. Is that kind of how you view Will Grigg as a confidence player?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a tricky one. Personally, I have a lot of sympathy for him because, we all know that the way the deal was done by Sunderland wasn't right, and that wasn't his fault in terms of the fee that was paid or what have you, and that pressure was always against him from the start, and then obviously that all kind of was came back around with the Netflix documentary, which didn't help me either. So I have a lot of sympathy with the way things have developed, and certainly under Phil Parkinson. I don't think he was given much of a chance to succeed, and so I do have a lot of sympathy with him. But I do think at the moment, it's a fairly simple one, isn't it, in terms of the season? Charlie Wyke has played well and he scored the goals, so Will's going to have to try and force his way back in when the opportunity presents itself, because when Wyke's fit again, he's obviously going to be the first choice because he's earned that.
Yeah. Well, not so hard as it has been in recent weeks. Paul, I'll start with you. If you could name a man of the match, I think I know who you'll go for based off your ratings, but
Yeah, same as last week. Same as against the previous game. I've just said it. Lincoln City.
yeah.
It's got to be Diamond for me. He's the only one that's shown pretty much the attacking mindedness that we needed in that game. If we had somebody else on the other side doing the same and somebody tried to run through the middle a bit better, we might have broke them down, I think. But yeah, he gets man of the match easily for me.
Yeah. And Phil, for you?
Yeah, I'd go with Diamond as well. Honourable mention for Burge because I do think he made a couple of saves that kept Sunderland in the game, and I think they would have lost it otherwise. So bit of credit to him, but I'd be happy to go with Diamond.
Yeah. Well, our next scheduled game is, of course, Shrewsbury at home on Saturday, I believe. And first of all, Phil, how likely do you think that fixture is to actually go ahead?
I'd have to say at the moment it seems fairly unlikely to me, but we should know more over the next day or so. Clearly, what's going to be crucial is whether the players who are currently self-isolating will be tested. The results of those tests are clearly going to be key because if there are any more positive tests, then there might well be that more players have to self-isolate, etc., etc. So I think at the moment it seems very unlikely to me that the game will go ahead, but we'll have to wait and see what the results of those initial tests are because that's what's going to be key.
Yeah. Well, we will go with predictions anyway because at the minute it is scheduled. So Paul, Sunderland versus Shrewsbury, your predictions for that one. Bearing in mind Shrewsbury I think it was Lincoln that beat yesterday, and I think they might have beat Hull at the weekend. I'm not sure if that was right, but I know they've beaten some good teams recently, and they are in good form. So, your predictions for that one, Paul?
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a very tough game, I think. If we had a full squad, obviously it would be different. But I'm going to give the rating based on the players that we had available for the last game, and I'm going to go. I just refuse to ever, as you know, predict defeats or draws in this league. So I'm going to go for a very hard-fought 1-0 win to Sunderland.
Yeah, Paul, for you, Phil, for you, sorry.
I think judging on the current situation, the players who are likely to be available in Shrewsbury recent form, I think I'd probably go for a draw. But it is very difficult to judge at the moment because who knows if the game will be ahead and two who'll be in Sunderland's team if it does.
Yeah. Well, that is all we have time for today. Phil, Paul, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having us on.
Yeah, cheers for having me.
No worries at all. We will be back potentially again on Sunday to discuss the game against Shrewsbury if that does go ahead. If not, we will have another Sunderland quiz out in the next week or so. But again, we will let you know on Twitter. So if you do follow us on Twitter at SpeakSAFC, we will let you know about that. But until then, we will see you later.